Yeah.
All right, Izzy, I'm doing this for you. Hope everything's good in Eretz Yisrael.
And he gets a mazel tov.
Yes, the Oigam here wishes you, I think, 2 mazel tovs, right?
Right.
Double mazel tov to you and Rebecca.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm excited to be back with you again, and this time we're not on Zoom, so it's live in person. The Mirz Hashem, things with COVID should continue in the direction that it's moving, that it's getting less and less, and we should be able to stay in person instead of having to talk through a computer. Tonight, Mike Schneider brought this tshuva to my attention. It's a tshuva from the Rema. He learned about it through the Daf Yomi. The Maggid Shir, I don't know which shir he attends, but the Daf Yomi is learning Maseches Beya, and they were up to the Mishnah that says that you're not supposed to mekadesh on Shabbos. You can't make kedushin. You can't marry a woman on Shabbos. The Gemara says because it might lead to writing. And so the Rama wrote a famous tshuva where he, in order to resolve a crisis, he was Mekadesh and Isha on Shabbos. And then he wrote a tshuva defending his decision, because then there was obviously at the time probably created a tremendous tumult. So it's a very fascinating tshuva. It's very, very interesting. So I'm going to learn the tshuva with you. I cut out certain excerpts, and I'm not going to read the whole thing inside, but we'll see as much as I can. So he writes as follows. This is Tshuva Kufchav Hey, and my Schneider pointed out to me the reason why that's significant is because the Tshuva before that is Kufchav Daled. The Rama wrote a heter or justification. There were people in a certain city that were drinking regular wine, and he wrote he was Muhammad Schus on them, and he wrote a justification to drink stam yenam, even though he says it's better not to, but he said he wanted to put the people in the city in the better light. So the people, as they often do, think that they're bigger gedolim than the gedolim, and they censored it. They took it out. So if you take out kuf chav daled, so then kuf chav hey becomes kuf chav daled. So that's why in some versions it's kuf chav daled. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, he used to always say in his shmuzin that you have to daven for the army and you have to have hakar satov. And there were these kanoim that didn't like it that he said that, because that was like being Zionist. And when they printed his shmuzin, so in the shmuzin there's a piece where he says that any soldier that gave up his life for the state of Israel is in the category of Harugei Lud. And the Gemara says that Harugei Lud, there were these 2 brothers, that there was a woman that there was a young girl that was, the king's daughter was murdered, and they had a blood libel. These blood libels go back already, for thousands of years. So they blamed the Jews. So these 2 brothers, Lunis, and I forgot Papianis. Yeah, so they had Greek names or Roman names, so they obviously were not too religious. All right, could be. Either way, so they came forward and they said, leave the king was going to murder all the Jews in the city. They said, don't do that. We take responsibility. We're the ones that murdered her, and they were put to death. So the Gemara says that even the great tzaddikim can't stand b'mechitasan because they were moshe nefesh. They gave up their life. So Rav Chaim compared Israeli soldiers who gave up their lives to the Harugei Lud. And so in the first edition, where they printed Rav Chaim Shmuz, in the first edition, it's there. But in the second edition, when they reprinted it, some genius took it out. So it's the same thing where people, they think that they're smarter than the Gedolim. If you would say something against the Gedolim, they'll attack you and assault you, but they could censor the Gadol.
Mark Shapiro has a whole book of it.
Yeah, these kind of things?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so this is human nature.
Either Rav Chaim or Rav Yoshev, I forget which one, either Rav Chaim Shmulevitz or Rav Yoshev. The Talmidim said they wanted to go up to Tzfas, to the
Yeah, Rosh Shlomo Zalman.
Yeah,
famous-
Rav Nebenzahl brings it down.
Famous story, yeah. So what do you have to go to the
Yeah.
Dvarim?
Yeah.
You could
Har
go
Herzl.
Har Herzl, yeah. Also, beautiful story. So Okay, so here's the tshuva. The Eshma and the Rema writes is very flowery. We don't know how old he was. There are different versions of how old, or different opinions of how old he was when he died. The Chidah in the Shem Migdalim says he was 33 years old. He said he died in Lag BaOmer. He wrote 33 Svarim, and he was 33 years old. And he said that's what his son saw on the Matzeva in Krakow. I saw the Matzeva in Krakow. It didn't say that, but the Matzeva was probably rewritten over the year. The Matzeva, he died 500 years ago, so it could be we don't have the same text on the Matzeva. But I saw in some of the other places said he was 40, some said he was 50. Whatever it was, he wasn't an old. He didn't die as an old man. The Rav Yosef Cairo, the Beis Yosef, he lived a much longer life. He lived to be 87 years old. So. No, was it 87 or 88 to 75? So that's right, 88 years. He was 88 years old, and they were contemporaries. Rav Yosef Cairo, the Rama was born in 1530. Rav Yosef Cairo was born in 1488, but Rav Yosef Cairo died after the Rama. He died in 1575. This is how I know all this stuff. And the Rama died in 1572, so they overlapped, and the Rama, when he was writing his commentary, before he wrote a commentary on the Beis Yosef, on the Shulchan Aruch, he wrote independently. He wanted to write a Shulchan Aruch, and then when he found out that the Beis Yosef or Yosef Cairo had written one, so he stopped that project and he changed the format. So, but anyway, he was probably, we don't know. He was a relatively young person, whether he was in his 30s or 40s. So he says, Veshma, and he writes very flowery. Veshma acharai kol rash gadol. That sounds like Volotzion. I heard after me a great tumultuous sound. Asher haviru kol b'machane. They spread a call with I guess the criticism in the camp. Gomer hibitu acharei Moshe. That's all these are psukim in Tanakh. Hibitu acharei Moshe. They were looking after Moshe. His name was Moshe Islish. So they habitu acharei Moshe. V'maisa hanasei they mikaro. She said mikaro. They made this tremendous tumult about a incident that happened with me recently. Shesidarti kedushin takach sakupa kederas haaretz. I was Masada Kedushin under a chuppah, as is commonly done. Shekol yodim say the hakal lama nechneses l'chuppah. I'm not sure why he quotes it. That's a quote from the Gemara. Everybody knows why the cow goes into the chuppah. V'haya be'ishon laila. It was in the darkness of night. B'leil Shabbos, Friday night. B'sho machsa b'layla. It was an hour and a half into Shabbos. V'maisa v'asiba asher echrichuni lozeh. And the incident and the reason why I was forced to do that. Hu mavur nigul chalboi shar irenu. Everybody in our city knew why I was Masada Kedushin. But once word spread, so people said, what? Masada Kedushin on Shabbos? And they didn't know the details. So he felt compelled to record the details. Here's exactly what transpired. Ishaya ba'aretz, there was a man who was living in the neighborhood, v'tama kesef mimenu. He lost his money. V'shidech bito gedol leven zugar roila. And he made a shidduch for his oldest daughter, an appropriate shidduch. V'hi bimei shiducheha, and during the period of engagement, asher arach hazman knisaso l'chuppah, there was an extended period of time between the engagement and the time they got married. We don't know how long. In those days, it could have been 5 years, 10 years, or it could have been 1 year. But in any event, the father went to his resting place. In other words, the father died. He left everybody behind. And the daughter was bereft. She was an orphan. She didn't have, her mother, I guess, had died previously, and now she didn't have a father. Kim Krovim, all that she had left were some relatives. Nasula Rechokim. So you look at that's the Krovim were Nasula Rechokim. They all of a sudden they didn't know her. You know, the aunts and uncles. Where were they? And like when the Torah says that you're not allowed to be Malamayan by Shabbos Aveda or Suchul Salim, so that's what they did. They pretended as if they didn't know who she was, because they didn't want to be saddled with the financial responsibilities that were about to unfold. There was one person who was ready to take responsibility. Achi Ima, her uncle, her mother's brother. Asher Echniso Leveso. He took her into his house. Ki ein lagal karimena. He was the closest one that was willing to do so. So as the time for the marriage approached, the Shahaya Roy and it was necessary to slaughter cattle and prepare the chasana meal.
It's an expression.
Just to mean,
Right.
They weren't going to slaughter.
Yes. What?
I'm sure they weren't going to slaughter any cattle.
No, the Shaykhet had to.
Okay.
Yeah, they were. What? Yeah. Yes, you're right. You're correct. It was by Yosef. What?
Yeah, by Yosef.
Yeah. So lo rasa shum temunas hanedunya b'shar tzrachim. There was no the nedunya, the dowry, which was always promised to the chassan at the time of the engagement. It wasn't materializing. Zulasi kol echad habala, except that she heard voices told her, in other words, her neighbors told her, shetitfo l'tochan asma l'chasuna. They told her neighbors, her friends, said, "Don't worry, go. You prepare for the chasana. Go to the mikvah. We'll put on a wedding gown, and the nedunya, the dowry will appear." She listened or obeyed her neighbors, and they followed their advice. Kisu also biyom vav, and they also covered her head on Friday. Behinuma kederach absulos. They used to the Mishnayos and the Gemara and Teshuva was talking about a hinuma, which was some kind of head ornament that was complicated to. I guess they braided the hair or something, and it was a whole process to arrange a hinuma. So they prepared the hinuma for a chasana. And when as it became dark, so it was time for the relatives to come forward with the dowry. They closed their hands, and they didn't want to give the money that would have been appropriate for them. I guess maybe the uncle was able to put together 2/3 of the dunya, but there was 1/3 of the dowry that was missing. What happened? Such a fascinating story. So the chassan, he was taken aback.
To beat a path to the door.
Yeah, I'm not marrying her. The leadership of the city, they saw was unfolding. It was a tremendous tragedy. Here you have a Yisaima. It's not enough that she lost her parents, but now she's engaged, she's supposed to get married. The day of her wedding, the chassan is going to run away. So go Levayish Bas Yisrael Mikaya Chesenis, and they told the chassan, because of money that is money is not everything. So you're causing great embarrassment to the kala. He refused to listen. No saying chayresh atamazla. He was like he was deaf. No, he didn't listen to people that whispered in his ears. Call garas chacham tinidenu, and he wasn't moved by the chachamim that yelled at him. So in the meantime, instead of having a chasana, there was this tremendous fight that was unfolding, and the Kedar Shamar less Ksuba, the less Tigra. The Gemara says that there's no Ksuba that there doesn't have some fighting associated with it. So that there was this whole battle going on. The Tzliach Maisa Satan, so the Satan who loves to get people embroiled in machlokes, and he continues to do an excellent job. Until finally they were able to come to terms. The chassan agreed to marry the girl. I don't know exactly how they worked it out, but maybe there were certain promises made. Whatever it was, Bas Yisrael Haguna, in order not to Ushalo Levayish Bas Yisrael Hagun, in order that the Kala, who was appropriately a worthy person, she kamti v'sidarte kedushin b'zman anal. So he made the kedushin on Shabbos. V'hinei b'asher malinim olai, and because the people complain about me, basi lahasit l'nasa me'iti. That's like by the Meraglim. It says, no, by Korach. The lahavi raya the taimi v'nimuki imi, and I explained the reason why what I did. V'amasamach, what I rely on. B'zel omer kazer re'ei v'kadesh. That's like by Rosh Chodesh. This is what the moon is. So he was going to explain what is the basis for his psak. So instead of reading the whole psak inside, I'm going to present to you the Gemara and tell you over certain parts of the psak, and then we'll go back to reading different parts that the Rema writes. So you'll see. I mean, it was so obvious that you're not allowed to make kedushin on Shabbos, so you could understand why that became a source of lashon hara and the rechilos, and everybody was tumbling. But now the Rama is held in the highest respect. He's printed on inside the Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber and Rama are the two pillars of Jewish life. They're the ones that have established the rules of halacha from that time on. But at that time, I guess the Rama, he's still a young man, and there were plenty of people who thought that what he did was a terrible avera. He was the Rama's uncle was the Marshal, the Shlomo Luria, and he was. Many people considered him to be the Gadol Hador at the time. But a few times I had spoke about this. I wondered why did the Rama become so well accepted by Klal Yisrael? It's unusual that somebody, literally all of Klal Yisrael, the very Yosef lived in Israel, so he was accepted by the Sephardic community, and the Rama lived in Eastern Europe, so he in Poland, so he was, or wherever Krakow was at that time. So he presented the minhagim of Eastern European Jewry, but eventually he became the Rabbin Shel Yisrael. But at that time, his reputation was still not that strong. So the Mishnah says, Kol shechayav alav mishum shvus, on the third page, Kol shechayav alav mishum shvus, mishum mishus, mishum mitzvah, b'Shabbos chayav alav yantiv. The Mishnah is describing three categories of isurim, three categories of restrictions that apply on Shabbos. There are certain things that are shvus, certain things that it's not a mitzvah at all. It's just totally up to the person. It's things that a person decides on their own whether they want to do it or not. And nonetheless, there's certain isurim that apply. Let's say a muksa. Muksa would be a shvus. There's no mitzvah to take a hammer, so that would be it's a shvus. Mishum mishus. Rashi explains that there's certain things that are partially a mitzvah. The Mishnah calls it, relative to the first category, the Mishnah calls it a rishus, that it's not a full obligation, but nonetheless, there's a partial mitzvah, but still Chachamim prohibited on Shabbos and Mishum mitzvah. And then there's certain things that are actually a mitzvah, and also they're prohibited on Shabbos. And the Mishnah is going to go on and enumerate what are those, in each one of these categories, what are the things that are part of each one of the categories. So, for example, the first category of Yishus is not to climb a tree or not to ride on a horse. So there's no mitzvah to do those things. It's totally elective. And Chazal made an isser. And then the rishus, which is things that have partially a mitzvah, but they're not obligatory, is not to participate in a bezdin, and not to mekadesh anisha, not to perform chalitza on Shabbos. And the third and we'll see why kedushin is not a mitzvah. And the third category of mitzvah would be that you're not supposed to make hektish and Truma Ma'aser, you're not supposed to separate on Shabbos. So those are things that are a mitzvah. So there are things that fall into those three categories, and all of those groups are also there are exeris that apply to those three groups on Shabbos. So the Yantiv is the same as it is on Shabbos. So the Mishnah elaborates what's in each category. So the Mishnah says, where I have it underlined, the Elohei Mishum Rishus. What are the things that are considered to be a rishus? It's not fully obligatory. It's not a complete mitzvah. The Rashi says it's not a mitzvah gemura, but it's a partial mitzvah. What are and nonetheless they're also on Shabbos. What are they? Lo danim, you're not allowed to have a din Torah on Shabbos. Lo mekachi, you're not allowed to mekadosh an isha on Shabbos. Lo choltzim lo miyabim, you don't perform yibun and chalitza on Shabbos. So the Gemara is surprised. What does it mean that kedushin and having dinei Torah is not a mitzvah? Why isn't it's a mitzvah to have a din Torah? If people there's a mitzvah to go to a beis din and have a psak. So the Gemara, right before where I underlined it, the Gemara asks, well, why isn't that a mitzvah? So the Gemara says it's not a mitzvah. It means there's other dayanim that could pass in the shayla. But when it comes to kedushin, so where I have it underlined, the Mishnah says v'lo mekachin. The Gemara says v'lo mitzvah ka'avid. What do you mean? It's a rishus. Why is it a rishus? This should be in the third category. This is complete mitzvah. You're obligated to get married. Rashi says in order to mekayem pru'urvu. Shenose isha lifros v'libros. My kari lei rishus. Why do we call it a rishus when there's a chiyuv to get married? So the Gemara answers, if you look further down on the page, the isla isha vanim. We're talking about a case where the person has a wife and children. So therefore, there's no mitzvah anymore. If you have children, you're already mekayim mitzvah pru'uvu. And in addition to the mitzvah pru'uvu, there's a mitzvah of b'boker zara saracha l'erev hatanach yadach. The person is supposed to continue having children even after he has a son and a daughter. But if you have a wife, so you're already mekayim that mitzvah as well. At least you have the ability to mekayim the mitzvah. So there's no mitzvah to marry more than one wife, as long as you're able to mekayim those two mitzvahs. So since you have a wife and a child, so that's what the Mishnah means when the Mishnah says that kedushin is a rishus. So now Tosas says, if you look at the Tosas on the right side, the second Tosas says lo mitzvah kavod pirush kunches v'havilei l'machshavino bahadi inach deseifa mi mitzvah. But the Gemara's question, v'ha mitzvah kavod, there's two ways to understand the question. This is the crux of the whole thing. There's two ways to understand. When the Gemara asks, it's a mitzvah. Does the Gemara mean to ask that why do you say it's a why do you call it rishus? Rishus in the Mishnah means things that are not obligatory. Why do you call it rishus? There's an obligation to get married. That's one way to understand it. Or the Gemara's question is, why is it usher on Shabbos? If there's a mitzvah, so why did Chazal prevent you from being mekayim a mitzvah on Shabbos? So Tosas says that Rashi learns the first way. Pirsha kunshis v'havile machshavino b'hadei inin deseifa mi mitzvah. That the Gemara's question is, why do you call it rishus? It should be called a mitzvah because a person is obligated to have children. And umishani lo tzricha dika da'adifim minei. So the Gemara's answer is that we're talking about a case where there is that's by dinei Torah. Why is it not a mitzvah? So Gemara says because there's somebody else that could be the dayan. Kach ain't a mitzvah kolkach. Dumya dahani the sefer. Ufiza yachol lios the gam beleka the other minei aser. So the when the Gemara answers that there are other people that could be the dayanim, the Gemara is not saying that if there aren't other people, then you would be allowed to do it. The Gemara is just saying that the reason why we call it a rishus is because it's a case where there are other dayanim available. V'chein pirish nami lo mekachin hu mitzvah kavod, and the Rashi goes the same way. When the Gemara asks that by kedushin ha mitzvah kavod, it's a mitzvah. So Rashi says, if you see Rashi where it's underlined, Rashi says v'may karei rishus. The Rashi on the left. Why do we call Rashi? This is the kasha is not why is it usher. The kasha is why do you call it a rishus if there's a mitzvah? Umishani dis leishu avanim. So the Gemara's answer is that we're talking a case where the person's already married and has children. So mashma afilu ein lo ishu avanim mikol makom usher. So according to Rashi, it means the Gemara is not saying that if you're not married, you're allowed to be Mekadesh. The Gemara is just asking why does the Mishnah call it Rishus? So the Gemara says the Mishnah is talking about a case where there's no obligation to get married because you already have a wife and children. But the Gemara is not changing the plain meaning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that you're not allowed to be Mekadesh on Shabbos. So that's true in all cases, whether you have a wife or you don't have a wife, whether you have children or you don't have any children. There is it's permissible, it's usher to marry on Shabbos. That's the way Rashi learns the Gemara. So, but but Tosfos quotes further on. He quotes from Rabbeinu Tam that did I underline it?
Yeah, you did.
I did.
Rabbeinu
Tam. So we're Rabbeinu Tam Pirish the high mitzvah kaved v'amay gazu. The whole mitzvah kaved v'amay gazu. Rabbeinu Tam learns that the Gemara's question is not why did you put it in the category of rishus. The question is why is the halacha that way? Why did Chazal restrict the person from being the mitzvah of Puruvu on Shabbos? So Mishani Losricha Disla Ishuvanim. The Gemara's answer is because he doesn't need to get married. He already has a wife and children. Aval im ein lo ishuvanim mutar l'kadosh the mitzvah kaved. But if he doesn't have children, then he's allowed to get married. So it's a very fundamental, how you learn the Gemara makes a tremendous difference. According to Rashi, whether you have children or not is irrelevant in terms of the Isser. The Chazal made an Isser. The Gemara is only asking why did the Mishnah call it a Rishos? And Gemara says we're talking where there's children. But it doesn't change the halacha. But whereas according to Rabbeinu Tam, the Gemara is asking why it's a mitzvah, so why should it be Asr? And the Gemara says it's Asr because you already have children. But if you wouldn't have children, then it would be mutter. So there's a fundamental machlokas, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, whether you're allowed to get, if you don't have children, you're allowed to get married on Shabbos. So this Maisa with this Nebuch, the Yisaima, and what the Rema did was the Rema basically followed the psak of Rabbeinu Tam. Because Rabbeinu Tam says she was a Yisaima, she was never married, she had no children. So then, according to Rabbeinu Tam, you're allowed to get married. The Gemara, that's the Gemara saying, well, mitzvah of it, it's a mitzvah. What?
Wouldn't it not matter whether she had children or not?
It's really him.
Yeah, the Acharonim asked that. Why is she allowed to get married? The mitzvah is on him. She doesn't have a mitzvah. I think this is because the Chazal wouldn't make an isser to restrict a woman from getting married. The reason why they made an isser is because is exera. The Gemara says because you might write, but they wouldn't make such exera. They wouldn't have made such exera if it would mean preventing the husband from being the kind of mitzvah approval. She goes on the husband's coattails. So the Rama was following Rabbeinu Tam's position, but according to Rashi, it indeed would not have been permissible. It would have been usher to get married because the Gemara doesn't say well mitzvah covered. The Gemara doesn't mean to say the difference should be permissible. The Gemara just means to say it's in the wrong category. Now there's rayas to Rashi and there's rayas to Rabbeinu Tam. Each one has strong rayas. The rayas to Rabbeinu Tam is the rise to Rashi rather is because the Gemara, the Yerushalmi says that a Kohen Gadol has to have a wife on Yom Kippur. That's a requirement. So they prepare an extra wife in case his wife dies. They prepare an extra wife. So the Gemara says, well, what'll be if she'll die on Shabbos? He won't have a wife. Because he can't make a kinyan on Shabbos, he can't get married on Shabbos. If you look at the lines that are underlined right after we saw Rabbeinu Tam, Tosfos says v'kosher the parakam the yuma yishami gavi kohen gadol mesaknu l'isha acheres. A kohen gadol you prepare an extra wife in case his wife dies. So the Gemara asks for the Yishami asks for a kinyan kohen Shabbos well Yom Kippur is always the same as Shabbos. Doesn't have to be on Shabbos. So how's he going to be able to marry her? So the Yerushalmi answers, Mishani ain't shvus v'mikdash. The Yerushalmi says because in Beis Hamikdash there's we don't have Yisurim D'Rabbanan. But in any event, you see from the Yerushalmi that even though the Kohen doesn't have a wife, the Yerushalmi held that he's not allowed to marry a wife, and the Yerushalmi only says it's exclusion for a Kohen. But that would clearly demonstrate that even if you don't have a wife and children, you're still not allowed to marry a wife. So that's in support of Rashi's position. So Rabbeinu Tam it says a teretz. There's a little bit of a daichuk. If you look where it's underlined further down, it says Yeshlamar Kipir Shabbein Tam V'Lakash Mehid Kohen Gadol D'Shema Chad Mitrei Taimi Noken. Yishalmi could have said that he's allowed to marry a wife because it's a mitzvah, so therefore he's allowed to marry a wife. But the Yishalmi chose one of two reasons. The first of all, the Yishalmi says because Ein Shus B'Mikdash, and the Yishalmi could have answered also because it's a mitzvah. That's the proof that Rashi would have against Rabbeinu Tam from the Yishami. Now against Rabbeinu Tam's pshat, against Rashi's pshat, there's a tremendous kasha. The Gemara, the Mishnah says that there's three categories. The middle category is something that's sort of a mitzvah, but not a fully obligatory mitzvah. So the Gemara says, why, according to the way Rashi runs the Gemara, the Gemara's question is, why isn't it a mitzvah? If you don't have children, there's a mitzvah. So the Gemara answers that we're talking about a case where you have children. So, but if that's the case, so why did we have to insert the case of kedushin in the middle category? Why not insert it in the last category of mitzvah? And it's a bigger chiddush that even if there is a mitzvah, still you can't be mekadosh in Shabbos. So why would you pick a case that is less of a chiddush where there's no children? So that the Ritva on the bottom asks this kash on Rashi. If you see where I have the bar, mitzvah. He asked it on the case of Dinei Torah, but it's the same kash question about marriage. That why do you choose a case where there's somebody else to be a dayan? Say a case where there is nobody else, and still it's a usher. Even though it's a fully a mitzvah. So that's a very difficult kasha on Rashi. So there's a kasha on Rashi, there's a kasha on Rabbeinu Tam. So that's why Rashi thought the kasha on Rabbeinu Tam was stronger, and Rabbeinu Tam thought the kasha on Rashi was stronger. But that's why you have two different positions here. You have Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So now the big question is, so what's the halacha? And why did they make such a tumult about the Rema? The Rema obviously is following Rabbeinu Tam. So why do people get so excited? He's entitled to follow Rabbeinu Tam. So the reason why they made such a tumult is because if you look in the major poskim, the Beis Yosef says that he wrote in Shulchan Aruch. There's always so many different arguments. How did he decide how to paskin? So the Beis Yosef says there were three main poskim. Who were they? The Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam. Those were the three pillars of Psak Halacha. So he said, the Beis Yosef says, I always follow the majority rules, the rov. If there's a difference of opinion, you have three, so you don't have even amounts disagreeing. So there's always one against two, or else all three are in agreement. So whenever there's a disagreement, he follows the majority. It so happens that the Beis Yosef usually passes like the Rambam, and there's a good reason for that. Why is that? Because the Rif, not because he was Sephardi, it's because the Rif, the Beis Yosef said he's going to go after the Rov, and the Rif was a Sephardi, and the Rambam was Sephardi, and they basically followed the same shita. The Rambam was a Talmud of the Rimigash, and the Rimigash was a Talmud of the Rif. So the Beis Yosef generally, there are rare exceptions where the Beis Yosef paskins against the Rambam, because where the Rif and the Rosh are in unison, so then he doesn't pass like the Rambam. But the three main pillars of Psak are the Rif, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh, and they're all printed in the back of Gemaras. That's why they're so important. So how do they paskin on this machlokas? You can have all through Shas. You have arguments. You have a machlokas, but you can't just pick and choose who you want to paskin like. So here you have a machlokas Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. How did the Gedolei HaPoskim paskin? So the Rambam says on page 4, Ein danim b'Shabbos v'chotzim v'lo in the middle of the page where it's underlined. Ein danim b'Shabbos v'chotzim v'lo miyavim v'lo mekachim gzer shem yichtov. You're not allowed to make Dinei Torah. You don't make Yivin Chalitza. And you don't make Kedushin, Gzer Shem Yichtov, because you might end up writing the Ksuva or writing the documents, so therefore you're not allowed to make Kaddish on Shabbos and Yantif. If the Rambam would paskin like Rabbeinu Tam, that the Isser is only if you don't have if you have children, then the Rambam should have qualified it. He should have said that if you have children, you can't get married, but if you don't have children, you're not allowed to then you are allowed to get married. The Rambam makes a blanket statement, Ein Mekachim. Similarly, the Rosh says in the middle paragraph, the Rosh says V'lodan Lo Mekachin, and he doesn't, and there's no commentary. Maybe he doesn't qualify it at all. The Rosh gives always a synopsis of the Gemara, the part that's relevant for halacha. So oftentimes he'll quote a line from the Gemara because that becomes the psak halacha. Where there's more than one opinion in the Gemara, the Rosh will quote the line in the Gemara that tells you the halacha, and that becomes the halacha. So the Rosh, the only thing he quotes is the Mishnah. The Mishnah says lo mekachin. So that implies that that's a universal principle. And the Rif on the bottom of the page says the same thing. Lo danim, lo mekachin, lo chotzim. You're not allowed to make kedushin, and you're not allowed to make dini Torah, and he doesn't make any qualification. So it's clear that the Gedolei HaPoskim held that you're not allowed to mekadosh isha on Shabbos. If you look at the next page, on page 5, this is from the Tur. The Tur is the father of the Rosh, and the Tur was also one of the Gedolei HaPoskim. The sequence was that you had the Ram and the Rif and the Rosh where they lived in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, and then the Tur was like in the the Rosh was later. The Rosh was around the 1300s probably. The Tur was in the 1400s, and then came the Beis Yosef and the Rema. So, but what does the Tur say? The Tur says the same thing as the other three major poskim. Below Mekachin, they have it underlined in the middle, near the top of the page. You're not Mekadosh. So the Tur holds the same thing that you're not Mekadosh. So the Beis Yosef, I'm not going to read it to you inside, but the Beis Yosef, where it's underlined, he presents the three major Rishonim, the Ram and the Rosh and the Rif, that they all say. So he says Rabbeinu Tam says that you could be Mekadosh and Isha. But he also, by the way, says that Rabbeinu Tam paskins the way in the Sefer Yasher. Rabbeinu Tam wrote a Sefer on Musar called Sefer Yasher, and he also wrote a Sefer on Child's Shoes called Sefer Yasher. So if you look in the middle of the page where I have it underlined, so he says Umashu the Hechad Lekad Adav Minei Shari Ladun the Hechad Lesle Isha Vadim Shari Lekadish. The Gemara is mashma that if there's nobody else to paskin and you don't have children, you could get married. That meaning that's the way the Rabbeinu Tam understood the Gemara. V'chein kosav Aran b'shem Rabbeinu Tam, and the Ran quotes the Rabbeinu Tam that explains the Gemara that way. U'mikom makom kosav Rabbeinu Tam b'tshuva shem mikashi ish b'shavos el mitoch tocha gadol. Even though Rabbeinu Tam held that that's shot in the Gemara, that the Gemara is saying that there's a mitzvah and therefore it should be permissible, but even Rabbeinu Tam did not want to follow his psak unless it was a case of great necessity. I don't know if the reason why he didn't follow it is because he wasn't 100% sure, or if the reason why he didn't follow it is because he thought that it would be a pirza. You're going to start telling people, you can be mekadosh and you can't. It's going to end up no good. What do you want to say, Batal?
This all Chatzila. If you have it, if somebody went and was mekadosh on Shabbos.
Yeah, everybody agrees that the marriage would be valid. I mean, if it would be an issa deraisa, so then there's a question of Iyov and Mahani, Iyov and Mahani. But by Derabanan, you violate an issa Rabbanan, but the marriage would be valid.
And because aren't there all the marks that we suing even the Chatzila on Shabbos?
Nisuin.
Right, like Knisel Chuppah.
Right. Yes. Nisuin is mutter. Right. Even though there's a question of chavala because of dam sulim.
There's a famous Ramban and Balmor on it, but in the end we pass him with mutter.
Yeah, nisuin is mutter, but some say nisuin is mutter because the chuppah already took the nisuin part. It's not nisuin is mutter. The bia is mutter. So the question is what affects the chuppah. What affects the nisuin? There's kedushin and nisuin. So kedushin we know is ish niktzim mishlosh drachim, but the nisuin because it's tarbiyah. But how do you make nisuin? So either it could be with a chuppah, or it could be with bia. So it's customary to have a chuppah. So therefore, if a woman got married erev Shabbos, so she's already married. The chuppah and the nisuin took place already. The only thing that's missing is there was no bia. So then, that you're allowed to do on Shabbos for whatever reason. The Gemara says why? Because the dam is mifked pocket, whatever.
But before, in the time of the Rema, the minhag was actually get married on Friday.
Yeah, they got married on Friday, and they had a chuppah. So there was everything was finished. They could do nisuin and the kedushin nisuin was
They got
done.
married on Erev Shabbos.
Got married on Shabbos.
Not on Shabbos.
Right.
So the Rama might have, the reason he did this might have been he missed it by 5 minutes or something. Which is
Well, he didn't miss it by 5 minutes. He missed it by an hour and a half.
He said an hour and a half.
An hour and a half. But I mean, what do you mean he missed it?
In other words,
It's
he had
usher.
set up the chasana, and he decided that the din of tzarach gadol was the fact that they had already set up the chasana. Not so much
Yeah, but that's if he follows Rabbeinu Tam. So then there's a heter, it's Tzarech Gadol. But if you don't hold like Rabbeinu Tam, you can't just do away with the halacha because it's you can't.
Yeah, I don't think his Sarach Gadol was the fact that they had set up a chuppah. I think his Sarach Gadol, he wanted to see this woman get married.
We'll see. The Rema himself says why there was a Tzarech Gadol. I mean, he definitely, it was only because the Rema, it was said that it was a tremendous need. That was and later on in the Tshuva, I'll show you later, that he says that's why he did it. But if it would be usher, so Tzarech Gadol wouldn't be we don't have anybody that would say that he's so the question is and the Shulchan Aruch also, if you turn to page 6, how does the Shulchan Aruch paskin? Even though the Beis Yosef brings Rabbeinu Tam, I just showed you that the Beis Yosef brings Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rabbeinu Tam says that b'shas tchak you could make kedushin. But in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't even bring that. He just says, on the top of the page, "V'lo mekachin," period. You don't make kedushin, because he held that you have three out of 3 say not to make kedushin. The Rabbeinu Tam is outweighed by the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif. Then that's it. So that's the halacha. So the question is, I mean, the Ramah is going to explain this at length, but the question is, why did the Ramah take it on his shoulders to go ahead and follow Rabbeinu Tam when the major Gedolei HaPoskim, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam, and the Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch, they all paskin not like Rabbeinu Tam. So how come he took upon himself to go ahead and follow Rabbeinu Tam? So if you turn to page 7. So he present. I skipped a lot of the tshuva, but he presents the he presents the sugya, and he presents the machlokas Rashi and Tosfos, and then so first he says v'hine aval b'sheni kedai lachriim v'kol koshli al pirish Rashi. He says, first of all, I have a problem with Rashi, and he asked the question that I asked you before, that the Ritva asked, that according to Rashi, what does the Gemara mean to say? Why the Gemara says the reason why it's in the middle category is because he's not married. So, but what's the answer to the question? Why not put it in the category of mitzvah? It would be a bigger chiddush that even if she is married, they're not allowed to get married on it. Even if he is married, even if he's not married, he's not allowed to get married on Shabbos. So that's basically what he asked. The kushay nerak lomalo chashuv eyu b'seving on mitzvah and kemay mishani b'others minay or b'dis leisha. If the whole kasha is, why did you put it in the middle category? Why did you put it in the last category? So what's the Gemara's answer? That he has a wife and children. Why not say a bigger chiddush? Say put it into the sefer where he doesn't have a wife and children. So therefore, in the next paragraph, he says maybe everybody misunderstood Rashi. He says maybe Rashi really agrees to Rabbeinu Tam, that if you don't have a wife and children, you are allowed to get married. And he has a whole long shot to explain why Rashi said what he said. So that's his first approach to. You could see him struggling in Krakow, and as the clock's ticking, and this poor lady is sitting there. So he's trying to think of reasons, and this tshuva. The amazing thing is everything that's in the tshuva he thought of while standing there. He went through the whole. I once saw the Satmar Rav has in the tshuvas of the Satmar Rebbe. What's the name of the tshuvas? What do they call the tshuvas? Nobody remembers. I know we have it here on the shelf. What? Diriyol. So he had somebody asked him a question. he was at it was by Shabbos Tish or something, and somebody asked him a question, and I don't remember opening a can. I don't remember what it was. So he said, in the Teshuva he wrote, I answered you in one word that it's either mutter or aser, but here's the thought process that I had. And then he writes like 20 pages. So that means that like in 1 second he thought about all this whole. So Rema also he was under enormous pressure. He was busy trying to negotiate with this recalcitrant chassan who had a valid point, but they were trying to put. But in the meantime, this whole tshuva he thought through in his mind at the time. So he has a long discussion that maybe Rashi really agrees with Ben Tam. But then at the end, after exploring that, he says, Amnam, the last 2 lines on the page, Amnam me'achar Rishonim zal, the Hainu Tosef and Mordechai Kosev Shem Rashi Lesser. Since the Rishonim quote that Rashi, Tosef and the Mordechai quote Rashi is holding that it's Aser, even if you have no children, the Chol Inyan. So therefore, he desisted from the Rashi and they weren't moved by my kashas on Rashi. So So I'm obligated to follow. I'm not going to take a stand against the major Rishonim of how to understand Rashi. V'chein nir dasa poskim arif v'rosh v'tur and v'rama v'tur. He acknowledges what I just said before. All the major poskim say it's usher, with the exception of Rema Tam. It's obvious that all these poskim hold like Rashi, and they understood Rashi not the way I wanted to understand it. That Rashi really agrees with Rema Tam, because then they have no length to stand on. So they obviously understood the sugya the way that Rashi was held that it's usher. Osha Samcha Yushalmi. Okay, then he says it's possible that the Yushalmi has a different reason why you're not allowed to marry a woman. The Yushalmi says you're not allowed to marry a woman because you're making a kinyan on Shabbos. The Bavli says you're not allowed to marry because you're the Gzer Shem Yichtov. And he had later on in the Teshuva he has a cheshbon that if you hold like the Yushalmi's reason, so then maybe there's more reason to be lenient. But he says, well, Lamaisa, we don't pass like the Yushalmi. So nonetheless, he says, Mikol Makom, the next paragraph, Kol Kihani Mili Ma'al Yisrael Limro Mishemoy. This is one of the most powerful lines in the Teshuva. Such wonderful things they should say in my name. They should tell over that I did a great thing instead of this was a major. Every rabbi is criticized for certain decisions that he makes, and every president, and every Jewish leader, and every secular leader. So you normally you wouldn't say where there's a difficult call and the rabbi makes a decision, you wouldn't say everybody should tell over with the great thing that. Okay, they didn't kill you on the spot, so you're lucky you got away alive. So just be happy. But the Rama says, Kol Kihani Mili Ma'isa. This terrific thing, Leimru Mishmoy. They should say to my name, that I was matir in this situation. Shahaya Shas Adchak, because it was a very big Shas Adchak. V'hoisa Habsula Mitzvayesha. She would have been embarrassed, terribly embarrassed. Imtamtim im chupa achar tvilosa ad achar Shabbos. She went to the mikvah, and now she's going to have to wait till after Shabbos. Gam ki eni miderach hamakomos leilach behinuma ad achar Shabbos. She was wearing this braided headband, which they couldn't remove on Shabbos. So the poor Kala is going to have to walk around with bizyonis, that she's wearing it's like the college dress, and there's no marriage. And she's going to end up having to get married on Sunday, which is also a great embarrassment. The Christians made on their holiday. That was the optimal day. Now it's an optimal day because nobody works on Sunday. But then it was a Christian thing to make. The Jews didn't make chasanas on Sunday. So the poor cow is going to have to get married on Sunday. In the case of such a big shas chak, it's kedai to pass like Rabbeinu Tam. Especially since there's a strong the raya that we saw before. Why does the Mishnah put in the category of the middle category? Why did the Mishnah say a case where there's no children and put it in the last category of mitzvah? V'chein pasuk b'agos hashri.
But that was rejected by everybody else.
Yeah, but he's saying there is support for Rabbeinu Tam. So this is a shas etchak. So he says in this case I was ready to be samach Rabbeinu Tam. V'chein pasuk b'agos yourself perak haradim yishem or zerua. The or zerua pasuk is also like Rabbeinu Tam. V'chein kasser Rabbeinu Tam b'tshuvaso. V'viu asmag ki b'doch gadol tiru l'kadish b'shabbos lo hayamar kein l'halacha ma'isa. Rabbeinu Tam didn't want to pasuk in the way of ma'isa, but he held that b'shas etchak he would be samach there. Mashma mihu the v'doch gadol yesh hater. The English Docha Gadol Mizeh. You can't find a case of greater Docha Gadol. Shahaisi Yisoma, she was a Yisoma Gadola. She wasn't a young girl. She was an older girl. Misbayeshes, embarrassed. V'hayu Kol and Kol Yameha, and she embarrassed her whole life. Kamat Lishnosa Mikol Habsul. She would be different than all other maiden girls. The Gadol Kova had Rios Shedocha Losasei Losasa Mikol Rema Shei Yerucha. The covenant abrius is docha the isur drabanan. But davar hazeh she'ena isur drabanan gzeira shem yichtov kamosh refers b'gar shalano. The isur of making kedusha on Shabbos is only drabanan because maybe you're right. Oh mishum davi kind kinyan b'Shabbos k'farish b'Shabbos, or like the Shabbos usually because you're making kinyan on Shabbos. So milvad having a mechish b'kash lo yismat shluchim. He says furthermore, if you're going to patchk around and wait till Sunday to get married, the chassan, it was hard enough to get him to agree. Run with it. I don't wait. Hurry up. He may well change his mind. He'll say, I'm out of here because of all this fighting. Apparently they wanted to grab the headband off of her head in the middle of Shabbos because one side felt that they had the upper hand. The gadol hashalom beinish lishto gadol hashalom. And even if there was no, even if she was just engaged, because in other words, even though she wasn't married yet, but there's still they were engaged. She was saying, he says we also the poskim said you shouldn't marry a young girl, and we're making anyway. And you're supposed to wait till she's old enough to say that she's agreeable. So because of the Jewish population is very small, so therefore we rely. I saw someplace somebody said the population was about, maybe it was in the footnotes here. The whole population was like under 10,000 Jews in Poland at that time. Kolzeh something negative. He says this was all in front of my eyes. Lismach al divrei Rabbeinu Tam b'shar poskim hamatirim b'shas etchak. Then he's gonna say another reason why he thinks that this is mutter. So I before we go on, we're gonna probably stop in a few minutes, but I just want to point out that the explanation that he's giving is very compelling. That it's shas etchak but it's still if you have all the rov of the poskim passing like Rabbeinu Tam, so do you have a right to say I'm gonna pick and choose? I'll pick this one posik who you have like 10 poskim. They all say they disagree.
But they're not dealing with shas etchak. They're dealing with normative halacha.
Yeah, but they're saying that
But they didn't give any.
If they were,
they didn't give any indication that b'shas etchak it would be different. So you have a right to assume that they held. They were certain that's pshat in the Gemara. They held like Rashi that the Gemara is not saying that if you didn't have a wife you're allowed to get married. So what in other words, how does it work in halacha? How do you? This is for Rabbanim is one of the hardest things. I always talk about it. It's not hard. If somebody asks me shayla, it's not hard to find out material. I can look at a bunch of svarim. What's hard is to decide what to do because Like somebody asked me mezuzah shayla yesterday, so I have this shayla about mezuzah all the time. It has to do with when there's a narrow room going into a wide room, and there's no doors and there's no pillar. But so I have one sefer at home that says you put it going from the wider to the narrow, and the other one says you go from narrow to the wider. And I already asked a lot of poskim, but nobody was able to tell me exactly what to do. So, but the Rabbanim have this all the time. You look things up. It's so easy with all the, I call them the cheating farms. So you could find all the opinions, and then if you can't find it there, so you Google it and you'll find more opinions. So the hard part is to figure out what to do. So, but there's pretty much there's rules of how you follow the mainstream. If the majority of the poskim hold a certain way, unless if you yourself are a posek, so then you have a right to say the halal. But for example, when you say you go after basar rov, but if there's din of kimli, then you could say I don't like the rov. I follow. I have my own opinion, but it has to be based on the fact that you're a posek and you understand the sugya in depth, and you're big enough to argue with other great people. So then you can say kimli, I want to follow the minority opinion, but otherwise you're supposed to follow the majority of the poskim. So so maybe Rabbeinu Tam felt Kimli. He felt that he agreed with Rabbeinu Tam. He thought Rabbeinu Tam's position was stronger than the other positions, and therefore he was ready to go with them. But I'm going to explore this with you further next week. I'm going to show you a very interesting in the Hakdama that the Beis Yosef and the Rema wrote to Shulchan Aruch. There's a very fascinating difference of opinion that I think will shed light on the different approaches here. So we'll finish the tshuva, and I'll show you next week, and I'll show you a tshuva from Rav Asher Weiss about a similar situation where he relied on the psak of the Rama. Rav Asher Weiss well, no, it wasn't the same case, but it was a similar case.
It involved kedushin.
It involved kedushin, But I don't want to give it away now until next week. I know. That's why I put it on the papers. I know. We didn't get up to there. Yeah, he relied on Ramah, to Ramah's position. Yes.
Is that just for